Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping straight into an absolute masterclass in corporate survival today. Now, when we think of business longevity, we usually picture companies that found their one true calling, right? The thing they were genuinely great at, and they just stuck to it through thick and thin. But what happens when surviving actually means entirely destroying the foundation you were built on?
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever stayed at a Premier Inn in the UK? Well, if you have, you've actually slept under the roof of a business that started out brewing beer over 250 years ago. So how on earth does an iconic company survive 3 centuries? Strangely enough, by ruthlessly abandoning its legacy.
1742 versus today. It's a massive disconnect. On one hand, we've got an 18th century brewing apprentice, elbow deep in yeast and hops, building London's biggest brewer. On the other hand, today, a 21st century hospitality behemoth managing hundreds of thousands of guests as Britain's biggest hotelier. To really get how Samuel Whitbread's brewing firm became the giant we know today, we've got to go back to the very beginning.
Chapter 1. A strangely dramatic lineage, from apprentice to partner. Our story kicks off with a 14-year-old kid named Samuel Whitbread. He was raised in a pretty strict, hard-working Puritan household. Back in 1734, his mom sends him off to London to apprentice under a brewer. He spends 8 long years meticulously learning the trade, getting to know the industry inside and out before he was finally ready to strike out on his own.
And that brings us to December 11th, 1742. 22-year-old Samuel Whitbread takes a modest inheritance and partners up with 2 guys, Godfrey and Thomas Shewell, to acquire a pair of small London breweries. This was a decidedly unglamorous start. We're talking small operations at the junction of Old Street and Upper Whitecross Street, plus another little brewhouse over in Spitalfields. It was super small scale, but let me tell you, in those cramped quarters, big things were brewing. Chapter 2. The Porter Revolution, Industrializing Beer. Fast forward just a decade, and this small partnership completely turned British brewing on its head. By 1750, Godfrey was out of the picture, and Whitbread and Thomas Shewell bought a derelict brewery on Chiswell Street. They didn't just patch the place up, they completely rebuilt it. They called it the Hind Brewery, proudly named after the Whitbread family's coat of arms.
But here's the thing, the Hind Brewery wasn't just a bigger building. It was the UK's very first purpose-built, mass-production brewery, and it was engineered specifically to brew porter. Now, if you aren't familiar, porter is this dark, long-lasting beer style that was literally exploding in popularity all across London at the time. Whitbread didn't invent it, but his absolute genius was figuring out how to industrialize it for the masses.
And this brilliantly illustrates how Whitbread turned brewing from a localized craft into a highly scalable, modern business. He basically did it in 3 steps. Step 1, he implemented massive, large-scale vats. Step 2, he introduced strict, standardized brewing processes to lock in quality and consistency at scale. And Step 3, eventually, he even brought in steam power. The results of all this industrialization, completely staggering for the era. By 1758, Chiswell Street was churning out 65,000 barrels a year. That alone made Whitbread the largest porter brewer in the country. But then, by 1796, output had skyrocketed past 200,000 barrels. To put that into perspective, at that moment, they briefly had the largest brewery output in the entire world.
Chapter 3. Building a Beer Empire, from draft to consumer packaged goods. So Whitbread's dominance definitely didn't stop in the 1700s. As they moved into the 19th and 20th centuries, they were relentlessly looking for that next major innovation to stay ahead of the curve.
For example, in 1868, they introduced their very first bottled beer. Now, I know that sounds completely normal to us today, but at the time, taking a draft-only product and turning it into a nationally distributed brand was incredibly visionary. It's an absolutely classic early example of consumer packaged goods thinking. They were doing brand marketing decades before branding was even a buzzword in the business world.
Following their journey through the 20th century, we see this rapid expansion and diversification way beyond just beer. 1868, bottled beer launches. 1948, they officially become a public limited company. For a while, they were scooping up regional breweries and even a portfolio of Scotch whiskey distilleries, including Lafroig. But check out this shift starting in the late 20th century. 1979, the Brewers Fayre restaurant chain opens. 1987, they place a modest bet on the first Travel Inn, a budget hotel for folks who just need a clean, reliable room at a fair price. Then, 1995, they acquired David Lloyd Leisure and a little brand called Costa coffee. The seeds for a massive corporate shift were firmly planted. Now, what's really interesting about this next phase is the shifting identity of the company. Chapter 4, The Great Hospitality Pivot, betting the company on hotels. This is the dramatic climax of the Whitbread story. That budget hotel concept they started in 1987, it was about to outlive practically everything else in their massive portfolio.
In 2000 and 2001, the company executed a truly high-stakes, ruthless corporate reinvention. They sold off their brewing operations entirely. Think about that. The very business that had defined the company for 258 years. The trade Samuel Whitbread literally apprenticed in, just gone. They willingly walked away from their defining legacy to focus 100% squarely on hospitality.
It was a total pivot. The old identity? 258 years of brewing. The new identity? Hospitality and hotels. Going all in allowed them to completely streamline their vision. By 2004, having fully committed to this new path, Whitbread merged its various hotel brands under one single powerful new name, Premier Inn.
But you know, their ability to adapt and ruthlessly prune their business wasn't quite done yet. Remember that little side bet on Costa coffee back in 1995? Well, over the next couple of decades, Whitbread grew it into one of the UK's most recognizable, most successful coffee chains. Yet, in 2019, they triggered another major strategic reset. Once again, proving they were entirely willing to kill their darlings if the long-term strategy demanded it.
They sold Costa Coffee to the Coca-Cola company for £3.9 billion. Yeah, let's take a second to absorb the sheer scale of that windfall. $3.9 billion. They took the massive proceeds from that sale and doubled down even further on Premier Inn, locking in their dominance at home and expanding really aggressively into new markets like Germany.
Chapter 5. Whitbread Today. Beds over beer. That gritty, unglamorous two-parter brewing operation that kicked off on Old Street back in 1742 has completely metamorphosed into a FTSE 100 hospitality giant.
Today, Premier Inn is the UK's largest hotel brand. While they do still own restaurant brands like Beefeater, Brewers Fayre, and Table, their modern identity is overwhelmingly built on beds, not beer. We're talking well over 850 hotels across the UK, Ireland, and Germany.
So the core takeaway of this explainer is this. Most companies that manage to survive nearly 300 years do it by safely sticking to what works. But Whitbread? They're a rare, brilliant masterclass in corporate adaptation. They didn't just survive by changing with the times. They survived by being willing to entirely abandon the very industry that made them famous in the first place.
So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If a company can successfully evolve from an 18th century porter brewer into a 21st century budget hotel giant, what industry will Whitbread conquer in its next 300 years? It's pretty fascinating to think about, right? Thank you so much for joining me for today's explainer, and keep asking those big questions.